It was a crisp Friday evening, and the city buzzed with the hum of weekend excitement. The soft glow of streetlights reflected on the wet pavement as couples, friends, and families hurried toward their favorite spots to unwind. Among them were Sarah and Daniel, a young couple dressed in their best, their faces alight with the kind of anticipation that only comes from a long-awaited night out. They had saved for weeks to splurge on this special dinner at one of the most talked-about restaurants in town, The Mark. The Mark was known for its exclusive clientele, impeccable service, and a reservation list that stretched into months. But tonight, Sarah and Daniel had managed to snag what they thought was a golden opportunity, a chance to dine among the elite, to experience the luxury they often dreamed of but rarely touched. As they approached the grand glass doors, Sarah tugged at her dress nervously, and Daniel gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. Inside, the restaurant was everything they had imagined and more. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, casting a golden glow over the marble floors. The soft murmur of conversations blended with the faint notes of the live piano, creating an atmosphere of understated elegance. Sarah's heart raced as she spotted a table being prepared near the window, its pristine white tablecloth gleaming under the ambient light. They stepped up to the hostess stand, where a tall woman with an icy demeanor and a name tag that read Victoria looked down at them over her glasses. Daniel cleared his throat. "Hi, we have a reservation for two," under Daniel Miller. Victoria's eyes flicked over her screen, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently. After a moment, she frowned, her lips tightening into a thin line. "I'm sorry, but I don't see your name here." Daniel's brow furrowed. There must be some mistake. I confirmed a reservation this morning. Victoria glanced at them, her gaze lingering on Sarah's second-hand clutch and Daniel's slightly scuffed shoes. "I'm afraid there's nothing I can do. We're fully booked tonight." Sarah felt a pang of embarrassment creep up her neck. "Is there any chance?" she began, but Victoria cut her off with a curt shake of her head. "I'm sorry, but without a reservation we can't seat you. Perhaps next time." Her tone was laced with finality. Before they could respond, a well-dressed couple arrived behind them. Victoria's demeanor transformed instantly. She greeted them with a warm smile, escorting them to a table without so much as a glance back at Sarah and Daniel. Dejected, the couple turned to leave, the humiliation clinging to them like a shadow. Outside, the air was colder, the city's charm dulled by the sting of rejection. Daniel clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "We didn't deserve that," he muttered. Sarah placed a gentle hand on his arm, trying to mask her own disappointment. "Let's just go," she whispered, though her voice trembled. The night ended with takeout from a small corner diner, the kind of place where the staff greeted everyone with a smile regardless of their attire or status. As they ate in silence, their dreams of an elegant evening lay shattered between plastic forks and styrofoam boxes. But beneath the surface, a spark had been ignited, a shared determination born from the injustice they had felt. The next morning, Sarah woke early, her mind restless. As she sipped her coffee, a thought began to take shape. It was bold, almost absurd, but it refused to fade. When Daniel joined her at the table, she looked at him with a spark in her eyes that hadn't been there the night before. "What if," she began hesitantly, "we did something about it?" Daniel raised an eyebrow, intrigued to spite himself. "What do you mean?" "What if we created a place where people like us didn't have to feel that way? A place where everyone felt welcome, no matter who they were or what they looked like." Daniel leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. It was a wild idea, reckless even. But as he met her gaze, he realized it was exactly what they needed, a way to take control of their narrative, to rewrite the story that had begun with a closed door and end it on their terms. Little did they know that fleeting thought over morning coffee would set them on a path neither could have anticipated. A journey filled with challenges, triumphs, and a twist so unimaginable that by the end of it, they wouldn't just change their lives. They'd change the very fabric of the city they called home. And as they plotted their next move, oblivious to the storm brewing in the background, one thing was certain. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. As Sarah and Daniel sat together, their small kitchen filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, their conversation began to flow like a quiet but determined river. They talked about the events of the previous night, replaying every moment and every word that had made them feel so small. But instead of letting that bitterness fester, they used it as fuel for something new. What if we really did this? Sarah said, her voice steady despite the audacity of her words. What if we opened a place where everyone felt welcome? No reservations, no judgment, just good food and kindness. Daniel rubbed his chin, the idea sinking deeper into his thoughts. He'd always been practical, the type of person to calculate risks before taking a leap. But as he looked at Sarah, he saw the fire in her eyes, a determination that mirrored his own. Maybe it wasn't such a crazy idea after all. We don't have the money for something like that, he said finally, though his tone was more curious than dismissive. Starting a restaurant isn't cheap. And where would we even begin? Sarah leaned forward, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug. We start small, she said. We look for a place that's affordable, even if it needs work. And we build from there. We've saved a little, right? Maybe it's not enough for something fancy, but it's a start. Daniel thought about their savings. It wasn't much, just a modest amount they'd been putting aside for years. They'd planned to use it for a down payment on a house one day, or perhaps for a long overdue vacation. But now, the idea of using it for something bigger, something meaningful, felt oddly right. That money's supposed to be our safety net, he said cautiously. If we do this, there's no turning back. Sarah smiled, her expression soft but resolute. Maybe that's what we need, a reason not to look back. The rest of the morning was spent scribbling notes on scraps of paper, brainstorming ideas, and sketching out a vision for their dream restaurant. They imagined a place with warm, inviting colors, where the scent of freshly baked bread greeted customers at the door. A place where laughter echoed off the walls, and where no one, no matter how they were dressed or where they came from, was ever turned away. By the afternoon, they were driving around the city, scanning neighborhoods for potential locations. Most of the buildings they saw were far out of their price range, as sleek facades and prime locations unattainable for two people with no experience in the restaurant business. But just as they were about to give up for the day, they stumbled upon an old weathered storefront on the corner of a quiet street. The building was nothing like the Mark. Its exterior was faded, the paint peeling from years of neglect, and the windows were clouded with grime. But something about it called to them. Maybe it was the way the afternoon sun hit the sign above the door, its letters barely visible under layers of dirt. Or maybe it was the thought that this place, forgotten and overlooked, could be transformed into something extraordinary. Sarah pushed open the creaky door, and they stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and memories, and the floorboards groaned under their weight. The space was small, with worn countertops and a kitchen that looked like it hadn't seen a meal in decades. But as they walked through it, they began to see past the flaws. They saw possibilities. This could work, Sarah said, her voice filled with cautious optimism. It needs a lot of work, but has potential. Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the room. It's not perfect, he admitted, but it's a start. They spent the next week diving headfirst into their plan. They met with the building's owner, an elderly man named Mr. Garrison, who was more than happy to rent the space to them at a price they could afford. This place has been sitting empty for years, he told them with a chuckle. I'd love to see it come alive again. With the lease signed, Sarah and Daniel rolled up their sleeves and got to work. They spent long hours cleaning, painting, and repairing the space, their hands blistered and their muscles sore. But as the days turned into weeks, the little restaurant began to take shape. They found second-hand furniture at thrift stores, repurposed old decorations, and poured their hearts into every detail. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Their inexperience became glaringly obvious as they navigated the complexities of permits, inspections, and finding suppliers. There were moments of doubt, times where they wondered if they'd taken on more than they could handle. And then there was the financial strain. The savings they had started with was quickly dwindling, leaving them to scrape together funds wherever they could. Despite the challenges, they kept pushing forward. Their vision for the restaurant, a place of inclusivity and warmth, was too important to abandon. And through it all, they supported each other, their bond growing stronger with every hurdle they overcame. As the opening day drew closer, word about their venture began to spread. Friends and family offered their support, helping with everything from assembling furniture to taste-testing recipes. Even neighbors from the surrounding community, curious about the transformation of the old building, stopped by to lend a hand or share words of encouragement. But not everyone was thrilled about their plans. One evening, as they were closing up for the night, a sleek black car pulled up outside. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his expression as cold as the winter air. He introduced himself as Richard Calloway, the owner of the Mark. "I hear you're opening a restaurant," he said, his tone polite but laced with condescension. "I thought I'd stop by and see what all the fuss is about." Sarah and Daniel exchanged uneasy glances. "Yes, we are," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Calloway took a slow look around the space, his eyes lingering on the modest decor and the scuffed floors. "It's an ambitious project," he said finally. "But take it from someone who knows this business. It's not as easy as it looks. The restaurant world is competitive. I hope you're prepared for what's ahead." With that, he turned and left, leaving behind an air of uncertainty that lingered long after he was gone. Sarah and Daniel stood in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on them. They had come so far, but now, for the first time, they began to question if they were truly ready for the challenges that lay ahead. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance, a reminder of the world they were about to step into, a world where success wasn't guaranteed, and failure was always lurking around the corner. But as they locked the door and walked away, their determination remained unshaken. They had started this journey together, and no matter what came next, they would face it as a team. The night after Richard Calloway's visit, Sarah lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His words echoed in her mind, blending with her own doubts and fears. She turned to Daniel, who was scrolling through their budget on his laptop, his face tight with concentration. "Do you think we made a mistake?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. Daniel paused, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "No," he said firmly. "We knew this wouldn't be easy, but we didn't start this to compete with people like him. We're doing it for us, for the people who need a place like this." Sarah wanted to believe him, but the pressure was mounting. They were still scrambling to finalize their menu, juggling supply negotiations, and trying to attract enough attention to ensure a strong opening. On top of that, the renovations were eating into their remaining funds faster than expected. Every day felt like a race against time, and the finish line kept moving further away. The next morning, they arrived at the restaurant early, only to find a surprise waiting for them. Someone had spray-painted graffiti on the side of the building. The words, "Stay in your lane," were scrawled in bold, jagged letters, their message clear and cutting. Sarah's heart sank as she stared at the vandalism, her hands trembling with anger and frustration. "Who would do this?" she asked, her voice shaking. Daniel clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "I don't know, but we're not letting it stop us." They spent the day scrubbing the wall clean, the physical labor a welcome distraction from the doubts that had been creeping in. By the time the paint was gone, their resolve had only grown stronger. They wouldn't let fear or intimidation derail their dream. But as the days passed, more obstacles began to appear. Permits they thought had been approved were suddenly delayed, suppliers backed out of agreements at the last minute, and a glowing feature in a local blog mysteriously disappeared without explanation. It was as if unseen forces were working against them, chipping away at their progress piece by piece. Sarah and Daniel tried to stay focused, but the stress was beginning to take its toll. Arguments flared over the smallest details. What color napkins to use, whether to add another appetizer to the menu, how to handle the unexpected expenses. Each disagreement left a bitter taste, a reminder of how much was at stake. One evening, after a particularly heated argument about the restaurant's logo, Sarah stormed out needing air. She found herself walking aimlessly through the city, her mind racing. She thought about all they had sacrificed to get this far, the countless hours of work, the sleepless nights, the dwindling bank account. Was it worth it? Could they really make this dream a reality, or were they just fooling themselves? Her steps eventually led her to a small park, where she sank onto a bench and buried her face in her hands. For the first time in weeks, she let the tears come, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She felt alone, overwhelmed, and utterly lost. "Rough night?" a voice said, startling her. Sarah looked up to see an older woman sitting on the next bench, her kind eyes filled with quiet understanding. She hesitated, unsure whether to respond, but something about the woman's demeanor put her at ease. "You could say that," Sarah admitted, wiping her tears. The woman smiled gently. "I don't know what we're going through, but I can tell it's important to you. Sometimes the hardest things are the ones that matter most." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "It feels like everything's against us," she said, surprising herself with the honesty of her words. "We're trying to open a restaurant, but it's been one thing after another. I don't know if we can do it." The woman's expression softened. "Starting something new is never easy. But you wouldn't be here if it wasn't worth fighting for. Don't let the obstacles make you forget why you started." Sarah stared at her, the words sinking in. She didn't know who this woman was or why their paths had crossed, but her presence felt like a lifeline in the storm. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. The woman nodded and stood, giving Sarah one last encouraging smile before walking away. Sarah sat there for a while longer, the night air cool against her skin. By the time she returned home, she felt lighter, her determination renewed. When she walked through the door, Daniel was waiting for her, his face filled with worry. Before he could say anything, Sarah wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have walked out." Daniel hugged her back, his voice soft. "I'm sorry too. We're in this together. We can't forget that." The next day, they redoubled their efforts, tackling each challenge with a newfound sense of purpose. They reached out to friends and family for advice, tapped into their community for support, and found creative solutions to the problems that had been holding them back. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. The shadow of Richard Calloway and the mark continued to loom over them. One afternoon, as they were finalizing their opening plans, a young man named Alex walked into the restaurant. He was dressed in casual clothes, his hands shoved nervously into his pockets. "Hi," he said, hesitating. "Are you the owners?" Sarah and Daniel exchanged a glance before nodding. "Yes," Sarah said. "Can we help you?" Alex looked around, his expression conflicted. I work at the Mark," he admitted. "I heard some things, and I thought you should know." Their curiosity piqued, Sarah and Daniel invited him to sit. Over the next hour, Alex revealed a series of unsettling details about Calloway and his efforts to undermine their restaurant. From pressuring local suppliers to spreading rumors about their inexperience, it became clear that the challenges they'd faced weren't all coincidence. "He doesn't like competition," Alex explained, "especially from people he doesn't think belong in his world." Sarah's stomach churned with anger, but Daniel placed a hand on her arm, his touch grounding her. "Why are you telling us this?" Daniel asked, his tone cautious. Alex shrugged, his eyes downcast. "I don't agree with what he's doing. You seem like good people, and I thought you deserved a fair shot." As Alex left, Sarah and Daniel sat in silence, the weight of his revelations settling over them. Their journey had been difficult enough without sabotage, and now they knew their fight was far from over. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the restaurant in a warm glow, they made a silent promise to each other. No matter what came next, they wouldn't back down. Their dream was worth fighting for.